Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness, and called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and he gathered together the waters, called he seas, and God saw that it was good. May God bless the reading of his word. And welcome to New Year's Cosmology class number 17, the wet earth. I know this is going to be a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. Alright, so today, what we're going to be talking about is we have to segue a little bit. We're going into this event called the Fall of Lucifer, but you have to understand the earth before you get to this event that involves the earth. So, basically, we look at the evolutionary atheistic story, which you had biological evolution made by Darwin, but before that, you had uniformitarianism. And this uniformitarianism geology started off with an earlier debate in geology between the Vulcanist and the Neptunist. And the Vulcanists were those who believed that the Earth was originally a volcanic type of matter that then became the Earth, and water was acquired later. And the Neptunist was one who said it was more of a watery function. And the Neptunists were okay with the idea of a worldwide global flood to a degree and stuff. This is back in the 1700s. But the Vulcanists got away from that, and they started getting into these old Earth and then evolutionary ideas. The evolutionary model that goes from, Big Bang and then goo to you, basically what you see there is that you have this planetary evolution where the sun gives off this dust, and this dust starts to flow around and attract itself, and eventually, with this centrifugal force, I think it is, all the dust would come together and then compact itself, and basically it would be massively hot. And so you basically had a big ball of lava, and that lava would then cool down over the period of, a billion, 2 or 3 billion years. And basically, after that cool down period, the outer core of the Earth would then dry up into this granite shell. And basically underneath that, you have this volcanic heat. Well, since you have such massive heat for the massive spin of the Earth and all this gravity and all that kind of stuff, therefore, we wouldn't have a wet Earth. Water would have to come later. And I've heard some people argue about, collecting of like a steam afterwards, but most of them have argued for something along the lines of a shower of asteroids and comets, which would then hit the Earth, melt, and then form the water, as it would help the granite dry up and stuff over the period of these many millions and maybe even billions of years. It's probably around 1 billion years, but anyhow. So that is the evolutionary tale, the evolutionary story or myth, and that's how this is all going to take place for them. The creationist I look to a lot in talking about this stuff is going to be Dr. Walt Brown. Ken Hovind really kind of takes after Walt Brown, so I'm really kind of going more on that, even though I did learn it first out of Kent Hovind and then got Walt Brown's book. But basically, the idea is that we see in the Bible, when it says the great deep and the waters, we have a wet earth. We have one where the earth is essentially starts out covered in water, okay? And it's formless and it's void and it's very liquid-esque, okay? And so basically, you have the earth, which underneath the earth, instead of just a big thing of lava spinning around like a star, what you really have is you have this great deep, and basically under the earth there are seas and stuff like that. The earth is actually the earth is starts off water, and then you have the earth here, and then it gets raised up, okay? And so when the earth raises up, it comes out, and we see these continents form. All right. Yeah. Where am I? Get here. All right. So, all right. By the way, if my producer would like to get my eraser, he can. But anyhow, so that's basically the idea. And then for the time of the flood, the earth had this layer of subterranean waters underneath it. Now, of course, the Bible also talks not only about a great deep, but it talks about pillars of the earth. Okay? So these pillars, what they're doing is they're holding up this continental shell. All right? And so it's just earth to earth. Most people would argue that this lower end is probably going to be a layer of basalt, and the top layer is mostly going to be a layer of granite. Now, basically, when we get this stuff together here, the question is, what's really down there? What's really going on? Well, in Russia, they had a project where they burrowed a massive hole, one of the most massive holes ever, okay? And I think that there's some competition in other continents or whatever, but when it was made, it was the deepest hole ever made. And they called this the Kola hole, Kola, and essentially when they burrowed this hole, they went deep. They didn't find, after the 7-kilometer mark, they figured they would find that this stuff is basalt. They would switch around that time, but it didn't. And then they found something even freakier, okay? When they got about 14 miles deep, they started finding water started appearing. As they dug down, all this water seeped in. And they also found that the mud, of course, it's water, earth, mud, okay? The mud would be boiling with hydrogen popping out of it, okay? So, what's going on? Because here's the problem. When you have miles and miles and miles of rock, okay, on top, then that's more and more and more and more gravity pressure. So with all that pressure, theoretically, especially you had the hot earth and you got all this rock pressure, there shouldn't be water there. The water should have all leaked to the top, had billions of years to go ahead and boil up to the top, And maybe, I could see the possibility of maybe the granite and stuff kind of what I call sweating it. You know what I'm saying? In other words, it had it evenly distributed, and then the gravity squeezed out the water, and it, basically culminated to that point. But then they've also found some other things. In the minerals of the earth, they found this in ringwoodite, but also in wadselite. Right here, this is wadselite and ringwoodite. But in N.Y.C light, they found that there's about 2% of water. And that doesn't sound like it's much, right? But when you actually get the amount of N.Y.C light covering all the surface of the Earth, you find that you could squeeze this thing like a sponge, and that 2% becomes about 30 oceans worth of water, okay, that's deeply buried in the midst of the Earth. Now, some would argue about like that stuff when it comes to like the flood or whatever, but basically we do have a wet Earth. In North America, the seismologists made a big discovery that made some waves the last couple of years, and that is that measuring some earthquakes, they found that 400 miles beneath the surface of North America, and I think it's probably like, that's just because they have the scientists there, okay, like, it might be some other instances of this, not just in North America. But they found that 400 miles, theoretically, there must be about 4 oceans worth of water underneath 400 miles. Now, by the way, what is water like if it were subterranean like this, so many miles underneath the Earth? Well, basically, it becomes highly pressured to the point that the molecules are not necessarily together. It's kind of radioactive and kind of crazy and stuff. And basically, it's all just kept there, encased, okay? It's encased, and it's under a huge amount of pressure. And it's also very plasmatic and electromagnetic. And so, that's one thing that I'm going to introduce. We talked about Walt Brown earlier. I'm going to rely heavily on his model, the hydroplate theory, but I'm also going to throw in some factors, and one of those factors is the electric universe and what's going on there. Because all these energies are translating to other energies, and it's all deeply connected together. And so when we look at electromagnetic universe in the Earth, and this subterranean water that would have to be pressured to make it plasmatic, then you're starting to see how all this stuff is flowing together. This is not just isolated objects and isolated science. Okay, one thing leads into another, Mach's principle. But basically, we go out, and then finally, now Dr. John Gideon Hartnett had wrote an article about this a few months ago. And basically what he did was he had reinterpreted some new peer-reviewed evidence. And in the peer-reviewed articles, they discovered, some of this volcanic material that they know is, as deep in the Earth as they can get, that spews up from, the volcanic eruptions and stuff like that. They found a material within it called, we call it deuterium hydrogen isotope. Okay, and basically that is water-based material. All right. Now, what's scary if you're going along with that volcanism, uniformitarian geology, evolution mythology type of thing, Big Bang, all that kind of stuff, is that you're dependent on this superheated dust coming together, and all that water's got to get gone, okay? If it's super hot and it's lasting billions of years, millions of years and stuff, then it shouldn't be there, okay? But instead, this dust that's supposed to be part of the original formation of the Earth, it's all wet, And so this is a problem, okay? Because, once again, the epic quest of the naturalist atheist is to get answers to understand a universe. And it has to work because it's up to them. Truth is in their mind. Truth is not in the outside world if there is no God. There shouldn't be a design. There shouldn't be a designer. There should just be random things that, just make sense according to materialism. And even that is going to fall apart philosophically. But we go back down, and so this deuterium hydrogen, really kind of debunks that idea. We have a wet Earth. Then we have the issue of polonium halos that they found in granite. Now, this is the classic book on this kind of stuff. Okay, Creation's Tiny Mystery by Robert V. Gentry, and it's a very interesting story. Robert Gentry was a chemist, basically from the time of the 60s. He had first become a Christian in college, but he had not become a strict Bible believer. He had grown up in the world of science, and he was a chemist. And his deal was that he wanted to make sure, and you know how it is. I mean, sometimes people get pretty touchy as far as like what exactly. I don't know if that's like the perfect title. Like, he worked at a laboratory, so I mean, I know it's a field of chemistry. I got to know Dr. John Gideon Hartnett, and he got mad at me because I said he was an astronomer. And he was a couple different things. It's like a cosmologist, physicist. But even then, I'm probably going to get it wrong, so excuse me. But basically, anyhow, Robert Gentry's story is that here he was in this field of chemistry, and now he's starting to kind of ask those questions about it. And so he's wanting to look and see. So he was dealing with an issue that I'm really going to touch in a later class. But the issue was dealing with radiometric dating and dating using the uranium and stuff like that. So basically, when they would measure this uranium, it would have a half-life, and they would measure how much it would take for the uranium to decay into lead. And so as they're making these calculations, they figure the Earth has to be so old. And they also did some stuff dealing with asteroids and stuff like that. Once again, it's going to be more thoroughly explained in a later class. But essentially, uranium is one of those very thick elements. Okay, you got like 200 different particles there. And so basically, when you have such a massive element, then radiation will leak. The electrons will start leaking out of it, and before you know it, the element will start to change. But it's not before you know it. It would take so much time. And so that's where they start getting the measurement of billions of years. And so as he's starting to investigate this, he's starting to look at the different types of radiation. And one thing is a thing called polonium, and the polonium would radiate out, but he found polonium in other places, and they'd find these things called polonium halos, and they would find it not in the uranium, which they thought it only comes from uranium, but basically they started finding it in granite, and not only in granite, but just in granite that's not really next to uranium or anything like that. Here's what these polonium halos will look like. Let me show that there. These are photographs. Now, polonium halos are microscopic. Okay, so this is like the best you're going to get. There. I think, let's see here. And that's to kind of give you a good example of the size of these rocks that they're measuring. So basically, he would find these halos. What are the polonium halos? Well, basically, it would radiate out of the rock, and it would form this kind of bubble. And when they would find these things and they cut them in half, then you would see those circles and those rings. And so that's when you think the ring of a halo. Okay, so they called them polonium halos. But they found them in granite, and they just couldn't understand that. They don't really think of granite as naturally radioactive and stuff like that. In fact, they use granite to kind of hold back radiation a lot of time. And Dr. Gentry would also, he'd specialize in dealing with nuclear waste and stuff like that. But basically, here's the weird part, okay? Now, in that evolutionary idea, it takes the granite, a billion years, several million years to cool off. Okay, and so you'd have this lava substance when all this radioactivity is going on. So the Earth has got all this granite, and it's heated up, and then you see the polonium leak. What's the problem? Well, the polonium doesn't take millions and billions of years to form. It actually could form in seconds or minutes. The longest you could go is several days. And then if it's in lava, okay, because the granite was originally lava, well, if it's in lava, then it's going to just disperse, okay? That thing will be totally gone and nobody will know it. It's kind of like if you, they use the illustration, if you have like a cup of water and you plop in the Alka-Seltzer, you plop, plop, fizz, fizz. Well, the fizz, imagine that you could like freeze the water and just stop all the bubbles right there in mid-place. Well, that's almost like what we're talking about with the polonium halos that are found in granite. Okay? It disperses and then it just stopped. It's like, well, how could it do that? How could it catch it? It has to be, something that was quick, something that just flashed it and just stopped it right there in place. And Dr. Gentry's found these polonium halos in granite all over the world. And other people since then have found it. But essentially, in the 1982 creationism trial, basically where Arkansas said you can't teach creationism and all that kind of stuff, basically what happened was the ACLU had one of their top scientists, okay, a world-renowned scientist, and they had the guy explain away all these different evidences for creationism. And when he got to the polonium halos found for granite, he really couldn't. He really couldn't find just a simple, easy answer. And so what he said is that this is just a tiny mystery, and I'm sure that we'll figure it out. Now, legally, the problem is that they don't want to say that they have faith in evolution, because in evolution is in faith, and why are you pushing one religion over another in the public classroom? We'll talk about that one in a later class as well. But basically, so what he said, he just says it's just a tiny mystery, and we're going to solve it. But basically, I've not seen any peer-reviewed work. I mean, people can make guesses and say, oh, that's the answer. They're like, oh, yeah, it's radon, okay? The gas, okay? The gas with some, radiation in it. Apparently that flowed through one of the hardest, solidest rocks there is, and it made it all the way over here without an alpha trail, okay? In other words, no trail of radiation without the alpha trail. It just floated right through, whatever. But that wasn't even, peer-reviewed. So, basically, as we kind of look through here, I'd like to see any peer-reviewed work. Dr. Gentry went through about 6 to a dozen different peer-reviewed articles, Nature, Science, all sorts of these secular peer-reviewed works, and they just never talked about it. They're like, okay, that's nice, moving on. All right. So, basically, and then after that, after he testified in the national stand, Dr. Gentry was fired. Yeah. There you go. Okay, you present something, people had trouble with the evolution, you're anti-evolution, you're fired. Okay, so basically, when we get down to this, the big deal here, I know this is probably one of those deeper issues, and, you get deep into chemistry and all that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, the problem is that if you're trying to build up this godless world and all these foundations, you look at the earth and you're going to end up all wet. We'll see y'all later on Bible Smack and New Year's Cosmology class.